was really good. But here's what I learned. I learned something about Bahia grass. Now, they all pronounce it Bahia, but you guys know I pronounce it Bahia grass. And I always will, because I'm from Pinellas County and we pronounced it Bahia. And that makes sense. Bahia, Bahia. There is no Bahia in there. It's Bahia. Okay? If you want Bahia in there, it's got to be Hay. Y'all got to change the spelling. But y'all ain't willing to do that, so it's Bahia grass, and I hope everybody knows that. Either way, I've always wondered, why is Bahia grass this kind of like stepchild of the turf grass industry? Like when you talk to people, definitely when you talk to applicators and not the applicators I was just with yesterday, they put the command on the Bahia grass and they love it. I'm talking about everyone else in the turf grass world pretty much hates on Bahia grass. But one thing I learned is that a lot of the communities in Florida now, they're not even allowing the planting of St. Augustine grass. They want what they call water smart grasses or low water grasses. They consider zoysia to be one of those, which I have not noticed that in my practices, in my practical practices. I've seen zoysia needs just as much water as St. Augustine, but I guess there's a fraction of a bit less that it needs, and so that qualifies. But that's also why you find Bahia grass in backyards. A lot of y'all that move into subdivisions and you find St. Augustine in the front and Bahia in the back. I always thought that was a money-saving thing because Bahia is so much cheaper than St. Augustine. But from what these guys were telling me, that's not all of it. That it's really about that water conservation. These builders, they have to meet a certain, I don't know if it's water conservation, water use, I don't know what it is, but some sort of code or whatever. And by the way, if there's a Florida builder on that wants to come on, I'm talking about what I hear, throwing it out there as a way to help educate. Maybe you guys will do more studies on it. I know I'm going to, but I'm also asking, if you are an expert in this, reach out to me, and I would love to hear more about it, positive or negative, whether you agree with it or not. I just want to know. But apparently there's these rules in place in some of these counties where they have to install this water conservation type landscaping or whatever, and Bahia qualifies for that. So that's why they plant that in the backyards, because it's supposed to do something to do with low water usage. Now that ticks off homeowners. I've never met a homeowner that thinks, oh yeah, this is great that I have two different grass types, especially because the weed controls on them are so different. Yeah, it's anyway, that's what I was told. But here's the other piece of it, and here's what I was thinking about, is I have sodded Bahia a couple times, and I've also watched it done. They just redid the street outside my house, and there was pallets and pallets of Bahia out there, and I ride my bike by, walk my dog by, and look at them and stuff like that, and watch it going down. I learned a lot. But it's always clumpy and chunky. But the other thing is there will often be cow pies in and amongst the sod. And anybody that's sodded Bahia, you have definitely found a cow pie. And I was like, why is that? So what these guys were telling me is that apparently Bahia grass is not necessarily grown on sod farms commercially. And the reason why is because the fields can't turn over fast enough. So here's how they grow sod in Florida. And warm season turf in general, as I know, and especially St. Augustine grass, because there's no seed for St. Augustine grass. It doesn't exist. There is seed for Bermuda, a little bit for centipede. There is, zoysia, yes, rare. Those are almost all grown, though, propagated vegetatively from an existing plant. You just take the sprigs, and in the case of Bermuda, you can spread the sprigs over, and they'll turn into sod eventually. They'll grow. Or you can do plugs. But the way sod farms do it is when they cut their fields, they cut the rows out and they'll leave what are called ribbons, like a 2 or 3 inch strip of grass. Let's say it's a St. Augustine grass. They'll cut through the field and pull out, whether they're doing squares or whether they're doing rolls. And every time they have to go make a new pass, they leave a 2 to 3 inch ribbon in between of existing living rooted grass, turf grass. And so they'll leave these ribbons of St. Augustine, and it takes, I guess, about a year for the stolons of those ribbons to grow back together and fill back in, and now you have a completely new, fresh crop of St. Augustine grass. It takes a year, so you can turn the field over one time per year, okay? But with Bahia grass, it takes 3 to 4 years. It has rhizomes, but they're small and chunky, and that's part of the reason why when you sod with it, the sod pieces fall apart. There's no tensile strength there. There's no rhizomes and stolons that are tightly knit together to hold those pieces together in these nice squares. That doesn't exist with Bahia grass because it's got those chunky little rhizomes, and so there's not a lot of it to hold onto each other. They fall apart. Also, the fact that it spreads so slow would just indicate to you that it's not going to be as tight of a grass. But for a sod farmer, you can't really make money when you can only turn a field over every 3 to 4 years. Why would you plant that grass when you have every other grass you can turn over in a year? And there might even be some that are faster, right? Because that's how you make your money. So what I heard is, and what I learned is that there will be fields that have cows on them, grass-fed cows, and those fields are planted with Bahia, whatever it is. And so the cows are on there. Obviously, they don't kill the Bahia. They just eat it down. It regrows. But apparently it takes 3 years for that to grow in. And so in order for somebody to make any kind of money with selling Bahia grass, they've got to have a secondary source of income, which in this case would be cows in the field. So it's not necessarily, the guy growing the Bahia grass doesn't necessarily own the cows, but he's growing that Bahia grass that he's going to sell in 3 or 4 years. But in the meantime, he needs to make money on his field, so he has cows there. So some farmer can let his cows go in there. They can eat the grass and be grass-fed cows, which everybody loves these days, and they can poop and they can fertilize and all that. In that field, it takes that 3 or 4 years, and then you can harvest it off and sell it as sod. So apparently the sod growers around here, they all know guys that do that, and they'll have, 4 or 5 of these partners in line because they just rotate them. This year, Johnny's ready. This year, Susie's ready. This year, Frank is ready, and they get their Bahia that way. They kind of contract it out years ahead. So that's very interesting to me. I wonder now with these laws coming in where Bahia grass is considered to be one of these water smart plants. I've always had this, I've said this before, is I really want to make Bahia grass great. I like Bahia grass. The Bahia grass I've worked with, I love it. It's a great barefoot grass. If you fertilize it enough, it gets really nice and thick. If you keep it watered, it doesn't go down to the ground and turn brown and thin out, but it never dies. If you guys remember earlier this year, in the spring, I did a video where we were in a drought this spring. We are definitely not in a drought now, my friends. After this hurricane, 19 inches of water. But prior to that, in the spring of this year, we were in a verified drought, and I showed some public common areas where I live of Bahia grass that was flat, down to the ground, brown, maybe little yellow, a little bit of yellow still sticking up. And as soon as we got like 2 or 3 days of rain, boop, back to green again. Now, it didn't get super thick because it hasn't been fed. It hasn't been fertilized. We have those communist blackouts I keep talking about here in Florida. But it's nice. It looks good. It looks decent. Doesn't look as good as it could be if it was pushed with nitrogen, but then again, no grass does. But it looks a lot better. So that's why Bahia grass is considered to be one of these that's acceptable to the nature type folks because of the fact that it can go with that less water. So less inputs, I guess. So that's pretty interesting that I learned more about Bahia grass and maybe why it isn't looked at as this great, wonderful grass, even though I do have a goal to make it great.